I come before the Senate this evening to talk about two nominees who will be up for a confirmation vote in the next couple of days. The first of those is Rick Grinnell. And Rick is being nominated to serve as our ambassador to Germany during a really important time, not just with the danger and volatility we see around the world, but with our relationship with Germany. Rick is well qualified, and I think it's urgent that we get him confirmed. By the way, Mr. President, Rick Grinnell was actually nominated last fall, and he was reported out of the Foreign Relations Committee with a positive vote on October 26, 2017. So for 6 months, he's been in limbo, even after getting reported out of committee. He's been blocked by just a couple of Democrats, maybe just one, and this body has not had the chance to vote on him. That's why I was pleased to see today that the majority leader filed cloture, and that means we will get a vote this week on Mr. Grinnell. And I assume that he will get supported by a majority of this body, but I hope it's not just a bare majority, because I think he's very qualified for the position. He is someone who has a lot of experience in diplomacy, international issues. In 2001, he was appointed by President George W. Bush to serve as the Director of Communications and Public Diplomacy for our representative to the United Nations. In this role, he advised 4 of our ambassadors, John Negroponte, John Danforth, John Bolton, and Ambassador Khalilzade, on the formation and the articulation of United States policy at the United Nations. He was also appointed by John Danforth to be the alternative representative of the United States to the UN Security Council with full voting rights and privileges. He served as spokesman there during a turbulent time, an important time, but he also did more than that. He was appointed as a United States delegate to a variety of United Nations conferences over the years, including the Financing for Development Conference, the World Food Summit, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, the Iraq Donors Conference, the Non-Proliferation Treaty Preparatory Committee, the high-level event on HIV/AIDS, and the Commission on Population and Development, among many others. He's moderated a lot of United Nations panel discussions over the years on subjects ranging from children in armed conflict to post-war construction issues, clean energy solutions, as my colleague was talking about a moment ago. And he is up to speed on the world's pressing issues, and so he's very well qualified to be an ambassador representing the United States. He's also been an active speaker, speaking on topics around the country that relate to crisis communications, the United Nations, international issues, ranging from Sudan to North Korea, Middle Eastern issues. He also has been on a lot of TV programs, which I think is one reason he has generated some controversy on the other side. Yes, he's spoken his mind on occasion, but he's also someone, again, if you look at his qualifications and experience and his ability, as he did for President George W. Bush, to be a team player and to work with the team to communicate clearly, an excellent, I think, candidate to be a U.S. ambassador, just about anywhere, but particularly to a country as important as Germany. He received his master's degree in public administration from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. And then finally, I would just say, the timing is really important. And one reason I think it's key that we vote this week is that we need an ambassador in Germany. Over the Easter break, I was over in Germany. I was meeting actually with our troops over there on a fact-finding mission because we have a lot of American troops in Germany still. And we were looking at some of the weapon systems that have been developed in my home state of Ohio and how they're working. And I will tell you, the people with whom I talked, and it was our U.S. military officers, but also German officials and others, were saying it is really important to have American leadership in Germany right now with all that's going on with regard to what's happening in Ukraine, where Germany is really a key player in keeping the European Union together, what's happening certainly in the Middle East, where they do play an important role, what's happening in terms of our economy and the trade issues. So I heard from everybody, why haven't you guys sent an ambassador over here? So it's time we do it. And then finally, there's a particular urgency this week because Chancellor Merkel is actually coming for a visit to Washington late this week. I think she'll be here on Friday at the White House in meetings. And wouldn't it be great if we were to have confirmed this qualified ambassador to represent our interest in Germany and to begin the process of improving our relationship with Germany and deepening that relationship. So I hope that we have the opportunity to have this vote in the next couple of days. I just urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, take a look at Rick Grinnell's background. I don't think you'll find one of the ambassadors who is a non-career foreign service person to be better versed in some of these issues, tough foreign policy issues, and I think he'll do an excellent job for us in Germany. The second nominee that I want to talk about briefly is one who has also faced some opposition on the other side of the aisle, to the point that he was reported out of committee last night on a pure party line vote, a 10-11 vote. I wish that weren't the case. I want to thank Senator Coons for actually voting present so that Senator Isaacson's vote could count. But I think Mike Pompeo, who is the current director of the Central Intelligence Agency, is extremely well qualified. And when you look at what's happened historically with regard to the job of Secretary of State, this body has been able to support people who they may not agree with on every policy issue, or may not agree with the president who appointed that person, but they realize that a president should be able to have his or her own person, particularly in that job, being Secretary of State, being the diplomat for the United States around the world. And as a result, with regard to Senator Kerry, who was a colleague of ours here, when he was up for his confirmation vote, the vote was 94 senators out of 100 supporting him. With regard to Secretary Clinton, when she was nominated, she was confirmed by a vote of 94 senators. 94 out of 100 voted for her. Now, that's been more or less typical. Colin Powell actually was confirmed by a unanimous vote of this body when he became the nominee for Secretary of State. Condi Rice got an overwhelming majority. I think it was in the mid-80s. And I would hope that, again, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would look at Mr. Pompeo's background and his qualifications. I don't think that they can dispute the fact that he's qualified for this job. This is a man who has been successful in everything he has done. From humble beginnings, he goes to West Point. He graduates at the top of his class, the top. He then is an Army officer. He is there before the wall came down. He's an officer in Germany patrolling the Iron Curtain. He then goes to law school after having served in the military. And he goes to Harvard Law School and ends up being an editor of the Harvard Law Review and graduating magna cum laude from Harvard Law School. And that's, that's pretty impressive, hard to do. He then goes into business. He's successful there, including businesses that had to do with national security issues. And then he runs for the House of Representatives, is elected. He's on the Intelligence Committee in the House, and so has the ability to get well-versed on a lot of the classified information needed to be able to understand, again, the danger and volatility we face in this world today, and well-regarded in the House on both sides of the aisle. And then he is nominated by the president to serve as CIA director. By the way, he was confirmed by this same body as CIA director by a vote of 66 senators, so a nice bipartisan majority. I hope that happens again. Because, again, I think it's really important that we get a Secretary of State in place at a critical time, but also that we get one in place who is shown to have some of the momentum and trust and confidence of this body. Certainly the president has a lot of confidence in him, or he wouldn't be nominating him for this additional responsibility. As CIA director, of course, he's become well-versed on all the issues. One I will just mention that you've heard about recently probably, which is that he went on a secret mission to meet with the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, recently, and he did that at the behest of the president to be able to help prepare for a successful meeting between the president and the North Koreans. We all hope that meeting is indeed constructive and ends up making progress on the denuclearization, which all of us hope for, of the Korean Peninsula. But you need somebody like Mike Pompeo there to help direct that. So I think it's the right time for him to move forward on a number of issues. That certainly is one. Another that I will say I'm very interested in working with him on is what's happening in Eastern Europe and Central Europe. The destabilizing effect that Russia's having, both with regard to what is called the hybrid war, in other words, disinformation and propaganda, but also the military part of this, which is happening on the eastern border of Ukraine. Russia, as you recall, took Crimea away from Ukraine. And in my discussions with Mike Pompeo, he understands that issue, he gets that issue. He supported providing weapons to the Ukrainians to be able to defend themselves, lethal but defensive weapons. That was a big change from the last administration and, frankly, from the first year of this administration. And it happened recently. Those materials are now being delivered, and the Ukrainians having just been there over the Easter break, the Ukrainians are feeling a renewed sense of support from their Western allies, particularly from the United States. And I think Mike Pompeo is the right guy to be there with regard to that issue also. I have taken a leadership role in this issue of pushing back against the disinformation, including the meddling in our own election here, which I believe happened, and I believe will happen again unless we're smarter about pushing back. That's why I have joined with my colleague, Senator Murphy, on the other side of the aisle, and others to promote this idea of a center at the State Department that coordinates all of the U.S. government efforts here, which are needed, and particularly focuses on the online effort and the need for us to be more aggressive and robust in our response. It's called the Global Engagement Center. And again, I've had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Pompeo privately, but also in public testimony about this issue. And he has expressed his strong support for that Global Engagement Center and for having a more effective and robust response. So I think he is the right person at the right time. I think he is qualified for this job as well as anyone I can imagine out there. And again, talking to my colleagues, some of them have said that they disagree with President Trump's positions, and that's why they're opposing Mr. Pompeo. You know, their favorite person, who would probably be in the other party and have different views, is not going to be nominated by President Trump. President Trump's going to nominate somebody who does support him on most of his basic approach to foreign policy and someone who he trusts. That's just how it works. And that's, again, when we supported John Kerry with a 94 Senate vote, I think it was 94-5, something like that. It's not that we agreed with all the policies from President Obama. It's that we believe President Obama should have the right to have his Secretary of State, who he thought was going to best represent him, and we thought that Senator Kerry was qualified. I think the same was true with regard to Hillary Clinton, who also got a vote of 94. The same was true with Condi Rice. The same was true with General Colin Powell. And the same should be true here, because certainly Mike Pompeo is extremely well qualified. The other thing I've heard from my colleagues, and I've talked to a number of them on the committee and off the committee about seeing if they could possibly join us in supporting Mr. Pompeo so he can have a little more of a bipartisan momentum here as he goes into this job. The other thing I've heard is that they're concerned that given his background in the military and given some of the things that he said as a member of Congress, that maybe he'll focus more on military power rather than soft power. In other words, less on diplomacy, more on kinetic or military activity. I don't think that that's consistent with anything that I have heard from him, either in our private meetings or in his public testimony, where he addressed this issue head on and said, no, actually, as a former Army officer and someone who went to West Point and graduated at the top of his class, did I say that earlier? Anyway, someone who went to West Point, he is someone who actually believes very strongly in soft power and believes that military actions ought to be the last resort, not the first resort. And I think that's true with almost anybody who's been in the military, certainly people who have been in combat. And I made the comparison to what Colin Powell said when he was nominated, which was very similar to that. What General Mattis says today, very similar to that. I believe Mike Pompeo has the opportunity not only to help with regard to these crisis issues we're facing around the world, North Korea, Syria, what's happening in Iran, what's happening in Ukraine we talked about, but I think he is someone who has the ability to improve the morale at the State Department at a critical time. In fact, I'm convinced of it. Having talked to some people at the State Department, and as you know, many of the career civil service people have been feeling as though they weren't being consulted. Mike Pompeo is a listener, and he's talked about what he did at the CIA. Talked about the fact that, God gave us only one mouth but two ears. In other words, we're supposed to be listening and taking in the input and then helping to lead as a servant leader, listening to people. I think that's what kind of leader Mike Pompeo is. So my hope is that he will be confirmed and that he will earn the trust that some of us have shown in him by doing exactly that at the State Department, getting the diplomats at the State Department engaged, empowered, being sure that we are taking every step possible with regard to diplomacy before turning to military action anywhere in the world, and working with our military and with the White House and with the Congress to have a U.S. foreign policy that is effective in keeping the peace. Yes, we need a strong military, because by having a strong military, by having a strong defense, we maximize the chance for peace. But we also have to have a strong diplomacy arm that's out there ensuring that we take every measure we possibly can to use soft diplomacy, and diplomacy, I think, is something that Mike Pompeo has shown that he is committed to. So my hope, Mr. President, is that we will have positive votes on Rick Grenell as ambassador to Germany and on Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State later this week, and that we can have some bipartisan support for these two, and that they, in turn, will earn the trust that this body has shown in them.